I'll just demonstrate kind of the idea behind this. I'm just gonna pick a random part of the song. To me, the way that you introduce the least amount of artifacts in editing guitar is to track it like this. If you can track just slightly slower and allow yourself a little bit of extra wiggle room in between when the guitar pick hits the string, when you're editing, especially if you're editing everything directly to the grid like we are in this case, it's gonna make your life a lot easier and actually make all the edits sound way more natural, because what you're doing is eliminating probability of you having to create gaps if a riff is rushed. So if you're playing a riff at, say, 150 beats per minute, and you track it at 150 beats per minute, but he rushes something, and you have to chop and move a guitar hit to a certain grid, you're going to create a gap there where no information exists. There are some ways around that. You know, you can pull the audio back over itself and do a long crossfade. You can use elastic audio and like time compression expansion to try to like smooth it out. It's funny, we were talking a little bit earlier, like a lot of times someone will track something, and when you're tracking only to a click and you only hear yourself in a click, your natural human inclination is to speed up a little bit. And that's with everyone, with drummers, with guitar players. I always find that when they only hear themselves and the click, they tend to rush a bit. So the idea is, you know, if you track it a little bit slower, a lot of times I'll track it and then move it into place and it'll be exactly at the right tempo and I don't have to do anything to it. So it's almost a weird way of trying to avoid having to edit stuff, or at least minimize what you have to edit, you know? Again, there are so many advantages to tracking an instrument solo to a click, because you can hear all the little nuances of everything going on, and you can really choose with great detail what little pieces you want and know will work in your edit. I've copied this little section of rhythm guitar. I copy it over here. So say, just for instance, that the tempo is actually, say it's 190, and we tracked it at 184. Which is what this is currently at. I'm gonna set this tempo to 190, and this is kind of, imagine that this isn't a perfectly edited chunk of guitar. Say that he just played this, and he played it really tight, and now my only job is to time align it with the actual tempo of the song, which hypothetically in this scenario is 190. So we track this at 184, I'm editing it to 190. So what I would do, the good thing about tracking a DI that's grouped to the amp track like this is that, you know, you have a really good visual reference of where the transients are. So I'm just kind of tabbing over. There are a couple different notes here, and I'm just kind of using the DI as a visual reference to see where the pick is happening. And obviously it's going to be pretty consistent here because this is an already edited piece of audio. So pretty simple. I mean, I've just found the transients, I found where the notes are being hit, and I'm just kind of moving things back. I guess that looks probably a weird. And the other thing you can do sometimes is use the nudge forward or back, which is just control plus or minus. And that moves, when doing this with a guitar, I usually set it to about 200 milliseconds. And then you can just kind of keep a note in its spot and nudge the interior data of the note back and forth, because obviously you can pull this out and you still have all that information there. And it's almost just like quantizing, you know, the guitar notes. But you see kind of the principle behind this. So you track something slightly slower, you edit it to the grid, you know, make sure everything is where you want it. Let's just stop there, for instance. Just for this example, rather.
Someone just said that is because the guitar player is a beast. I usually edit pussy picking. I can barely see transients on DI.
Yeah, it really depends. I mean, everyone picks differently. JB always has pretty good consistent picking, I've found. It's not hard to get a good clean take out of him because he's just a really good player. So yeah, I mean, having a good clean DI track and you can see the transients clearly is definitely a good visual reference.
But, I mean, I've worked with JB before. He plays well, but I wouldn't say that he's, like, the hardest player ever or anything. No. Like, I've worked with guys that hit way harder, too. So, I mean... He's
not, like, particularly heavy-handed, but he's precise.
He's not heavy-handed at all, so...
You know, he's got a good sense of how he needs to play riffs to come out clearly.
This guy must be tracking some really bad guitar players.
It might also be worth noting that this DI is colored because it's going through our API preamp, so there's a little bit of gain on it. It's not a totally clean DI.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of shit on it, but yeah. Anyway, when I get to this stage and everything's you know, cut and put where I want it, I will just do a batch fade 5 milliseconds usually. And then I've found that in relation to where the transient appears to be on your DI track, the sound of the pick attack is always a little bit before the beginning of the DI transient on like a heavily distorted amp. So what I'll do, since I've up to this point really just aligned all of these clips exactly to where they go and aligned the very beginning of each DI transient to the grid, I've essentially cut off all the pick attack. So in order to reintroduce that, I've got a little nudge trick that I like to do where I'll set this around like 600 milliseconds, the nudge value, and then move the inside of all that stuff back 600 milliseconds, and then treat the whole thing as a group and put it back into place. So effectively, it's just a kind of a workaround way of batch moving your edit points to reveal the pick attack before each DI transient, if that makes sense.
And for Pro Tools users, that would be Control and minus.
Yeah, I can do that again so you see. So Control minus would nudge all of the, sorry, I'm pointing at the screen, I know that's a no-no, would nudge all the information in the clips back that amount, and then hit minus again, and without the control, and it moves the whole chunk of what you have selected back into place where it was, the same value. So you've essentially just moved the edit points all together to the left. And that's just to make sure that you have the the right pick attack and the natural sound of the transitions between note hits. So that's kind of the whole idea, and that's essentially how we tracked this album on guitar.